I'm going to share with you a story of something that happened to my daughter Chloe and I back in 2004. A lot of disparate elements came together in an almost surrealistic 4-day period. As you'll see, these include an encounter with a shotgun-equipped, camouflage-clothed hiker on the Appalachian Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the first transit of Venus across the sun in 122 years, a black bear on Clingman's Dome, the most visited national park in the country, empty of people, an FBI most wanted criminal, and the death of a U.S. president. I suppose the beginning is the best place to start. Chloe and I were taking our annual trip around the country in pursuit of hiking, backpacking, camping, paddling, biking, and wheeling, all 57 at that time of the U.S. national parks. This year we decided to head to the East Coast because there was a transit of Venus across the face of the sun, which should be visible from a high point. And we decided to be at Clingman's Dome near the Tennessee-North Carolina border, with telescope and solar filter at hand. We were excited to greet the rising sun with Venus on its rare journey across the face of it. Clingman's Dome, though once thought to be the highest point in the U.S. east of the Mississippi River, has been relegated to second place by the slightly taller Mount Mitchell in North Carolina. I expect the citizens of Tennessee were forever wounded to learn they lost out due to a bare 40 feet of elevation. But I digress. Our thinking on the trip was we could spend a couple days hiking the Appalachian Trail, along which Clingman's Dome is the high point, and we could return to the pickup parked at Clingman's Dome after 2 days of backpacking, get out the telescope, and catch the Venus transit. So we stopped at the Park Visitor Center, where they helped us secure the necessary permit to spend the night on the Appalachian Trail. This was necessary because we weren't allowed to tent camp on this stretch of the trail. We'd have to spend time in a designated shelter reserved in advance. And we were off! We drove up to Clingman's Dome and arrived at the parking lot, where there are sufficient spaces for 150 or more vehicles. Clingman's Dome is a popular attraction, and the hiking trail to the summit is really a half-mile, several yards wide paved pedestrian road. At the top is a spiral ramp that allows one to ascend above the surrounding trees and take in the amazing view from a 360-degree observation tower. Great Smoky Mountains National Park is the most visited national park in the country, and in 2004 you'd have to add the visitors from the next three, Grand Canyon, Yosemite, and Yellowstone, together to exceed the annual visitation rate for the Great Smokies. The parking lot was somewhat busy, but we quickly found a place to leave the truck for the night. We first hiked up the paved trail to the observation tower located on the actual summit. It was busy, as one would expect, with well over 100 vehicles parked below. We then returned to the truck, got our backpacking gear out, double-checked for water and food, and set out on the Appalachian Trail, often just called the AT. We hiked to Double Spring Gap, our home for the night. Here there was a shelter, a pit toilet, and a spring. AT shelters are designed to accommodate 12 hikers. They have a tin roof, 3 hard wall sides, a chain link front and gate, and a fireplace. They're designed to keep you away from the occasional black bear. Inside are 2 platforms, one above the other. Up to 6 individuals sleep on each platform, chock-a-block if the shelter is full. Fortunately, this night it would not be. Another feature are stainless steel cables that provide a way to lift your backpacking gear high up between some trees to keep away bears and other critters that might have a taste for human food, or other smellable items that might attract curious critters. We hoisted our gear up and started searching for down wood to burn in the fireplace. Close to the shelter was well picked over, but a few hundred yards away we found pieces of downed wood suitable for a campfire. As we were hiking back to the shelter, we encountered another person, dressed in camouflage and carrying a shotgun. Now at this time, no visible guns were allowed in national parks, so thoughts of Deliverance, which was filmed not too far from here, were dancing in my head. In fact, just the day before, my daughter and I had rafted the Ocoee River, so I suppose one could excuse me for that. Indeed, this fellow, recognizing our nervousness, identified himself. "I'm a park ranger. I'm up here hunting for wild boar. They eat off the trees, killing them, so we're trying to rid the park of them. They aren't native to the area." Well, that certainly made me a bit more at ease. I could hear those dueling banjos fading into the distance. Whew. We returned to the shelter, and by this time another small group had arrived, a father and 2 adult sons. They would spend the night in this shelter, then in the morning head out of the park on a multi-day backpacking trip. As for Chloe and I, we'd be headed back to the truck to catch that Venus transit. One of the interesting things about spending nights along the AT is to read hikers' log entries in the book placed in each shelter. Bear in mind that some of these folks are hiking all 2,200 miles of the trail from Maine to Georgia, or vice versa. Planning for resupply is necessary, and traveling light is the key to success. Creature comforts are few and far between. Some log entries suggested the hikers would spend a night or two in Gatlinburg, which was a pretty good descent from the AT. One entry was a member of the Tabasco Donkeys, with which anyone who has ever hiked at Philmont's Scout Ranch in New Mexico is familiar. One particularly funny, if succinct entry simply said, "Nice pooper!" Taking care of biological functions in cat holes is never pleasant. And then there was the entry that read, "Ran into a ranger carrying a shotgun. Told me he was hunting wild pigs. 15 minutes ago I heard his gun. I hope he got one. Maybe he'll bring me some meat. Man, I'm so hungry for some meat." That night was stormy. The shelter was along the top of a ridgeline, and heavy rains pummeled us through the night. Strong winds caused acorns to fall off trees, rattling like hailstones on the tin roof of the shelter. At least it came at us from the backside of the small hut, rather than the open, chain-linked front. We would stay dry that night. The next morning we were up early, but not before the father and sons had already headed out the opposite direction we'd travel. The weather was overcast, remnants of the previous night's storm. There were low-hanging clouds and fog down in the valleys below. It was the type of weather for which the Great Smokies get their name. But it was less than ideal for viewing the first transit of Venus in 122 years. We were a bit disappointed. Regardless, we hiked back to the huge parking lot and were surprised to see only 2 vehicles in it. Ours and apparently the father and 2 sons. Where was everyone? Yes, the weather wasn't ideal, but it wasn't raining anymore. And the clouds in the valleys and such were quite scenic. It's what people come to these mountains to see. But there weren't any. We were puzzled, but we loaded up our gear and started the drive back down to Newfound Gap, where the road we were on intersected the main road through the park. On our way down, there was a black bear on the other side of the road eating berries. I figured surely someone would come along and scare him away, but stopped the truck in the road, there being no room to pull over, and shot some photos of him from inside the pickup. He kept a wary eye on us, while we kept a wary eye on him, but he continued to eat. And no one came up that road. After about 15 minutes, he scampered up the steep mountainside and disappeared from view. Man, I wish I could climb like that bear did. Anyway, Chloe and I continued down to the main road, and the gate to the spur we were on was closed. It wasn't closed yesterday. In fact, I hadn't even noticed a gate, but figured it's there for winter time when that road may be unsafe to drive. There was certainly nothing wrong with it today. I asked Chloe to get out, open it, and close it after I had passed through. Now on the main road, we headed east toward the North Carolina entrance, and here and there I'd see something worth photographing, and then I'd hunt for a place to park the truck, get out, and walk back and take the shot. Except after seeing no one for about a half hour, I realized that was silly. There was no reason to pull off the road. No one was on it, not a soul. We were by ourselves in the most visited national park in the country, and had no idea why. So we continued at a leisurely pace east to the gate. Once we had descended from the mountains, we saw another person, a park ranger in camouflage. Hey, we were old hat at this. He held up his hand for me to stop. There's been an incident in the park. I need you to keep heading out of the park until you reach the gate. If anyone tells you to drive in the other oncoming traffic lane, follow their directions. So we followed those instructions, and sure enough, we were told to drive in the oncoming traffic lane a bit further down. And in the lane we would have normally driven, there were people in various uniforms and civilian clothes sweeping the ground with metal detectors. And we saw vehicles from a variety of agencies, including the Park Service, Sheriff, and FBI. Now this really was getting curiouser and curiouser. Once we arrived at the park gate, which was closed, we were allowed to pass through, and there were hundreds of vehicles jammed up on the road. Everyone was asking us what was going on. Did we see anything? How did we end up in there anyway? We had few answers beyond seeing various law enforcement agencies sweeping the road. We stopped briefly at the visitor center, which wasn't providing any answers, and headed out, our intention being to drive along the Blue Ridge Parkway in the general direction of Shenandoah National Park, 350 or so miles away. One thing we did notice at the visitor center was a flag was flying at half-staff. Probably just some local official. So we headed to Cherokee, then on up to the Blue Ridge Parkway. And it did not escape our attention that there were more flags at half-staff, lots more. But we continued along the spectacular drive, enjoying being above the clouds and stopping here and there to shoot the occasional photo, now finding an appropriate pullout, of course. We would spend that night camped at the KOA in Asheville. We both really needed a shower, so this was a bit of a treat. The next morning we were headed out early, but today at a slightly more hurried pace than yesterday's cottywomple. We wanted to visit Thomas Jefferson's home at Monticello, then head up into Shenandoah National Park to camp. Once we reached Shenandoah, we stopped at a trading post along the road and noticed yet another half-staff flag. We took care of business there and then hopped back into the truck. As I was pulling out, Chloe asked me, "Did you notice the newspaper headline?" "No. Should I have?" "Coffin arrives in Washington, D.C. Saturday." And so were we supposed to. I stopped the truck, got out, and picked up a copy of the newspaper. Ronald Reagan had died 4 days earlier. That explained the half-staff flags. But that also meant that we would do well to change our own plans. Sightseeing at Washington during a state funeral didn't sound like a good idea. We decided to spend a couple extra days at Shenandoah and hike a few more trails and summit another peak or two. Well, that almost wraps things up except for one more detail. What was all of that ruckus going on back at Great Smoky Mountains? We asked at the Shenandoah Visitor Center and were told that an FBI most wanted criminal had been chased into the park, guns blazing, and as of that time, he had not been captured. We were sure glad we didn't meet up with him. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the rest of the story.